For millennia, some of the greatest empires the world has ever seen committed the exact same fatal mistake. They marched into the Iranian plateau with their swords raised, absolutely convinced that they could wipe a civilization off the face of the earth forever. The Macedonian phalanxes of Alexander the Great swept through these lands. The ruthless legions of Rome battered against its borders. Arab armies arrived under the banners of a new religion, and the unstoppable Mongol hordes of Genghis Khan devastated entire cities, leaving behind horrifying towers built entirely of human skulls. Any other nation would have vanished. They would have been dissolved into the great genetic and cultural melting pot of history, completely forgotten, just like the Babylonians, the Hittites, or the Assyrians. But with Iran, something entirely different happened. Something that, at first glance, seems almost inexplicable, almost supernatural. Time and time again, despite losing battles, watching their capitals burn, and enduring brutal foreign occupations, the Iranians did something no other civilization has ever managed to do. They absorbed their conquerors. Welcome back to Omen Myths. Today, we are crossing thousands of years of history to understand one of the most resilient, mysterious, and bizarrely powerful civilizations to ever exist. We are looking at the dark and fascinating history of Iran. We will explore how military conquest was slowly digested by a cultural force so deep, it acted like a psychological virus. Within a few decades of a bloody invasion, the very men who burned Iranian cities would start speaking the Persian language, building Persian architecture, and wearing Persian clothes. It was as if the East simply swallowed its invaders whole. How did a civilization survive over 5,000 years of apocalyptic violence? And why, at a specific moment in the 20th century, did this ancient empire voluntarily abandon its legendary name, forcing the entire world to stop calling it Persia? To understand the sheer depth of this survival instinct, we have to rewind the clock much further back than you might think. For a long time, the Western world was taught that the cradle of civilization existed in only two places, Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt. In this narrow view, the territory of modern-day Iran is just a footnote on the margins of history. But the Earth tells a different story. 50,000 years ago, Neanderthals dominated this rugged plateau. 36,000 years ago, they were replaced by Cro-Magnon populations of Homo sapiens. But the real transformation happened when humans stopped wandering. Archaeological excavations have revealed that the Iranian plateau hosted incredibly ancient urban settlements. Cultures like Jiroft and massive monuments like the ziggurat of Chagaz-Anbil prove that highly organized societies were flourishing here between 6,000 and 7,000 years ago. By the 4th millennium BCE, ceramics prove that one of the planet's oldest civilizations was rising right here, side by side with Mesopotamia and China. One of the first great powers of this dark, ancient era was the kingdom of Elam, ruling from the city of Susa in the southwest. The Elamites were so powerful that by the 20th century BCE, they were putting immense military pressure on the Sumerian cities. It was during this time that a truly extraordinary event occurred. The Akkadian king Naram-Sin went to war against Elam, but the conflict ended with something incredibly rare for the ancient world, a written treaty. The agreement guaranteed Elam's independence, as long as its foreign policy aligned with Akkad. This stands as one of the very first recorded diplomatic treaties in human history. The Iranian territory was already playing the game of international diplomacy before most of Europe had even figured out bronze. But the people we now call Iranians arrived a bit later. Between the 20th and 10th centuries BCE, nomadic tribes swept down from the Central Asian steppes and the Caucasus into the plateau. They belonged to the Indo-European family, and they called themselves Aryans, a word simply meaning nobles. They named their new brutal homeland Aryan Vaja, the land of the Aryans. Over centuries of linguistic evolution, that ancient phrase would slowly morph into the word we use today, Iran. These nomads merged with the ancient local cultures, forming two devastatingly powerful groups, the Medes and the Persians. It was in this harsh environment of arid mountains and vast, unforgiving deserts that the Iranian civilization forged its most powerful weapon. It wasn't a chariot, it wasn't a bow, it was an idea. Long before the birth of Christianity or Islam, a religion emerged on the Iranian plateau that would fundamentally rewire how human beings interpreted the universe: Zoroastrianism. For the ancient Iranians, the world wasn't just a series of random, chaotic events. It was an active, cosmic war zone between two absolute forces. On one side was Ahura Mazda, the god of light, truth, and order. On the other was Angra Mainyu, the spirit of lies, darkness, and destruction. To be Iranian meant to be a soldier of order fighting against the chaos, a chaos they literally associated with the nomadic steppes that constantly threatened their borders. But Zoroastrianism introduced something even more radical. For the first time, a religion claimed that time was not a repeating cycle. The world had a specific beginning, and it would have a terrifying end. There would be a final confrontation between light and darkness, followed by a final judgment and the renewal of the earth. When the Persians conquered Babylon in the 6th century BCE, they freed the captive Jewish population. Judea remained under Persian rule for 2 centuries, and during this cultural bleeding, concepts like the end of days, the final judgment, and linear history seeped into Jewish thought, eventually becoming the bedrock of both Christianity and Islam. The physical power of this civilization peaked in 550 BCE when Cyrus the Great united the Medes and Persians, forging the Achaemenid Empire, arguably the first true superpower in human history. Cyrus ruled unlike any warlord before him. Instead of crushing the cultures he conquered, he allowed them to keep their temples and local administrations. His successor, Darius I, pushed the borders from Egypt all the way to the Indus Valley, encompassing nearly half the global population. But no empire escapes blood. Cyrus himself met a gruesome end fighting nomads in Central Asia. According to the historian Herodotus, the nomadic queen Tamaris defeated his army, decapitated Cyrus, and shoved his severed head into a bucket filled with human blood, allegedly screaming, "You thirsted for blood, now drink your fill." Despite this, the empire endured. In the West, we obsess over the Greco-Persian Wars as a definitive defeat for Persia. But to an empire of that staggering size, losing a few Greek city-states was a border skirmish. Instead of wasting troops, the Persians simply used their massive wealth to finance rival Greek factions, making them destroy each other. It was a brilliant, dark strategy that worked until 330 BCE, when a young Macedonian king named Alexander the Great shattered the Persian army and burned the magnificent capital of Persepolis to the ground. It should have been the end. But this is where the cultural virus activated. As Alexander sat on the conquered throne, the conqueror began to change. He started wearing Persian clothing. He adopted the elaborate customs of the Iranian court. His attempt to Hellenize the East dissolved into the local tradition. The Greeks were eventually expelled by an Iranian tribe called the Parthians, who used their devastating mobile cavalry and the legendary Parthian shot to slaughter Roman legions for 5 centuries. Then came the Sassanids in 224 CE, who centralized the state and made Zoroastrianism the absolute law of the land, fighting exhausting endless wars against the Byzantine Empire. This exhaustion opened the door to the ultimate disaster. In 651 CE, out of the Arabian deserts, the Islamic Caliphate arrived. The Persian capital fell. The last Sassanid Shah was assassinated. A new religion and a new language dominated the administration. For places like Egypt or Syria, Arab conquest meant complete cultural erasure. They became permanently Arabized. But the Persians refused to die. Despite total military defeat, they launched a silent administrative insurgency. The Arab rulers of the Abbasid Caliphate soon found themselves entirely dependent on Persian bureaucrats, scholars, and poets. The conquerors adopted Persian methods of governance. The Farsi language not only survived but became the language of high science and poetry across the Islamic world. Then, the true apocalypse arrived. In 1220, Genghis Khan invaded. It was violence on a scale the world had rarely seen. Ancient irrigation systems were obliterated. Millions were massacred. Later, in the 14th century, the warlord Timur, or Tamerlane, swept through, famously erecting massive pyramids made entirely of the severed heads of the people he conquered. It was absolute annihilation. Yet, the ghost of Persia possessed them too. Hulagu Khan, Genghis's grandson, founded the Ilkhanate, and within generations, these fierce horse lords adopted Islam, spoke Persian, and funded local architecture. Timur, despite his skull pyramids, was mesmerized by the culture, kidnapping Iranian artisans to beautify his own capital. Every time a warlord sat on the Iranian throne, the throne changed the man. They arrived as foreign butchers and died as Persian kings. This brutal crucible eventually gave birth to the Safavid Empire in 1501, which officially adopted Shiite Islam, forever separating Iran from its Sunni Ottoman rivals and cementing its unique identity. But the 19th and 20th centuries brought new predators. The British and Russian empires played the great game, slicing the country into zones of influence to drain its oil. It was out of this humiliation that a military officer named Reza Shah Pahlavi seized power in 1925. He aggressively modernized the nation, and in 1935, he made a decision that shocked the West. For centuries, Europeans had called the land Persia, a Greek term that evoked exotic myths and ancient ruins. Reza Shah sent an absolute decree to every foreign embassy. The world must stop using the name Persia. The country was to be called by its true ancient name, Iran. It was a declaration that they were not a museum exhibit for Westerners to romanticize, but a modern living nation with 5,000-year-old roots. Today, the paradox remains. Mention Iran and people think of geopolitical tension, revolutions, and sanctions. Mention Persia and people think of magnificent poetry, golden empires, and lost magic. But they are the exact same Earth. Over 5 millennia, this plateau was invaded by the greatest armies history could produce. They almost always won the battles, but they never won the history, because Iran developed a survival mechanism so potent it turned military defeat into cultural assimilation. What do you think is the most impressive part of this story? The brutality of the conquerors, or the fact that a culture could literally brainwash the people who defeated them? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and ring that bell for your weekly dose of unbelievable true stories and historical deep dives. We are here to explore the past's darkest secrets. Thanks for watching OmenMyths.